Patrick says we're good to start. Tim won't be joining us today, so take her away.
Okay, well, let's call to order our PUC meeting for Wednesday, November 4th, 2020. Consent agenda. I have one thing I wanted to add. I'm no longer with the CCLEP board, and so I was hoping that Ann might be willing to be the new representative onto Cook County Local Energy Project. So we could maybe add that onto the end of the agenda. Otherwise, I'm good with the agenda as it is. So I would move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ann Passes, aye. George Wilkes, aye. Nice. Do we need a recount on that, or perhaps a delay of several days?
It's way too early.
Sorry. Budgets. This time of year is always so fun. Thank you so much, Mike, for putting these together. Again, it's just what a blessing to be in a city that kind of does the utilities well and keeps us on a nice economic even keel. So, Mike, you want to kind of take us through what you're thinking about for this year?
Hey, why not? Shall we start with the electric budget?
Mm-hmm.
So at your last meeting, I think it was your last meeting, we went through a pretty thorough look at our recent electric rate study. And the results of thinking about what our expected revenues and expenses are for the next few years is that we don't think we'll need to do a rate increase for a while. And that included the idea that we were going to continue to hold some space for an additional staff member, and also hold space for potentially increasing the amount that the electric utility pays to the general fund in lieu of taxes or as a franchise fee, and then also that we would set aside an amount of money annually that will be used towards climate action plan items. So seemed like a pretty conservative, lots of things that we weren't necessarily currently doing were built into the expense side, and we still think we probably don't need a rate increase. Well, now we'll look a little more specifically at what we intend to do next year. The memo that's included in your packet shows, I'll just point out a couple of things on the expense budget column for 2021. The first is that our purchase power number is significantly lower than the 2020 budget. And the 2020 results are that we're spending quite a bit less money purchasing power on the wholesale market from SIMPA because we're selling a lot less power. So no surprise there. It's been pretty consistently down around 10% for the year since COVID became an issue for us. It's noticeably more in the commercial sales down than in the residential sales, and I think that makes sense if you imagine how people's behaviors are affected by COVID. And if you think about some of our major commercial customers, including the school and the Y and courthouse and buildings that weren't fully operational for a chunk of the year. Mm-hmm. And then some of our other large customers being hotels and other lodging establishments that also weren't necessarily fully operational for the year. Having said that, that purchase power number being down will have a corresponding reduction in power sales when we look at the revenue side of things. The other elements of the budget, you can see the last three rows in the column. We've got our debt service number that we expect. This is just the interest that we're paying. We'll look at the actual cash flow for paying our debt payments on the next page of this memo. Our staffing reserve, this is that, again, we're reserving space in the budget just in case we decide we need to hire a third person. We've talked about doing for the past few years, potentially needing to add a superintendent to help with the planning and guiding of the work, but also potentially needing to add an apprentice to make sure that we continue to have a maintenance staff into the future. So we haven't gone a direction on that yet, but we want to make sure that our budget supports it. And then this last item, oh, go ahead, Ann.
Just a super quick question. As I was reading this, under other factors, there seems to be part of the sentence missing, and I wasn't sure what was meant. Since this also reduces our power purchase amount, the effect on the total budget.
I think it just means fill in the blank. Go ahead and have anything you want there. Let's get creative. Well, it's not as bad as it looks. So that, sales down 10%.
Okay.
For us, the biggest factor in our cost of sales is purchase power. So when that's also down very significantly, it's not like we have to find 10% savings in the rest of our expenses.
So you're trying to point out that the effect is minimal.
It's not nothing, right? But it's
Okay.
Considering all the other
Sure.
things in this budget, it's not enough for us to say we need to raise rates.
Okay, thanks.
That capital reserve item is basically just, again, a placeholder to make sure that the expense side is generating enough cash to pay for what we intend to do on the debt payments and other capital projects. We don't have a separate capital budget, although that was something that we talked about when we did our rate study, was do we need to start having a separate capital budget? If we had, in the next 5 years, a half a dozen different capital type projects that we intended to do, it would make a lot of sense to have a separate capital budget where we set aside a balance to pay for those and an annual reconciling of money going in and out of it. But we don't have any capital projects on the next 5 years other than things that are relatively small on a $3 million a year budget. So we haven't set aside a capital budget separate. We think that it fits in our annual expense budget pretty easily still. But we're, kind of have the pieces of it in place here anyway with this line item. We'll skip down to page 2. You can see our 2021 revenues from utility bills and fees. We're expecting to be down quite a bit from not only our 19 actual, but what we expected to get in 20. Mm-hmm. So this is about what we think we're going to finish at in 20 as well, this $2.5 million. So it's down pretty significantly, but since this budget's been generating excess cash on an annual basis, that's not necessarily a problem, again, that we have to raise rates to fix. The bottom line is, with all the pieces on the top and this amount of revenue, we still expect to make a small profit in 2021 with no rate increase and with reduced sales of 10%, and with all of those placeholders for things we're not necessarily doing yet. There's a pretty significant amount of money, cash money, that we need to make debt payments. We have 2 bonds in the electric fund, one of which pays for the reconstruction of most of our distribution system about 10 years ago, and one of which pays for the construction of our power plant in 2003. Both of those bonds have been refinanced, some of them more than once since their origination, and they're both scheduled to be retired in 2023. It's another one of the reasons why when we think about rates now, when it comes to 2024, this net, need to spend $441,000 in debt payments is going to go away, and we don't have anything that's going to slide in to replace it. So even if we were going to get squeezed a little bit in the next couple of years, we're going to make it up in the future. So a rate increase now would most likely mean we'd need to look at a rate decrease in 2023 or 4, and easier on folks, I think, just to keep it smooth rather than go up and down all the time. And there's also excess funds planned into this budget to accumulate into our fund balance. One of the things that our rate study suggested was we should have a much higher fund balance than we do right now. Just for a smaller utility needs to have a higher percentage of its annual expenses set aside because anything that might happen. For us, that anything could be we need to replace a transformer in our substation and it costs $500,000, for instance. And you know, that kind of project is not something that's planned. It's not something that's worth us. We've looked at, do we want to insure for a project, something like that? And it's actually not cost effective to insure when we can self-insure ourselves pretty easily by just having a fund balance. So that's the plan. Electric fund, my suggestion, no rate increase.
Nice. I did have a question. I think in the text there, it said that we hadn't increased rates for the last 3 years, but didn't we increase rates a percentage point, electric rates last year or the year before? Or maybe that language was referring to the SIMPA rates.
Actually, the SIMPA rate, they decreased at 4% last
Right.
year.
So that does pertain to us, but I thought we increased rates in the last 3 years.
I don't remember that we did. I know we talk about doing it in the electric fund, and maybe one of those 3 years we did a small increase. I can look back and check for sure.
Okay.
I haven't recommended an increase for a while.
Well, I remember you had recommended no increase, and we had voted in a 1% increase to fund climate action plan.
Our secondary brain source in here, Hayden, says yes, indeed, a 2% increase last year.
Okay. So you had probably recommended a 1%, or
I don't think I recommended an increase, but that's okay. You know, I'm still not recommending one. Our rate study that we did is also suggesting that not only do we not need one this year, but we probably don't need one for the next 4 or 5 years.
Okay. You had mentioned that the current budget in some way helps fund the climate action plan. Can you describe how it does that?
Well, this budget doesn't have a like a line item that says climate action plan.
Right.
But when we conducted the rate study, we said to Dave, put in a placeholder of a $50,000 annual line item for climate action plan support. And so that's what was built into his rate study when he looked at the next 4 or 5 years of you know, projected expenses, projected revenues. That expenses included that $50,000 line item. If you were to look like where would it potentially live in this budget, that capital reserve of 200,000 is basically saying we're going to take 200,000 of our revenues and set them aside for capital projects. They're really just going into our fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
So our fund balance would, you know, we're projecting for it to grow with this budget. We're also projecting to be able to use some of it for capital projects, including climate action plan related stuff. So if you go back to the idea that we don't have a separate capital fund and capital budget, I guess I would also think we don't necessarily need to have a separate climate action fund and budget either.
Mm-hmm.
But if you wanted to add a specific line item to the budget, then we would just kind of take it out of that capital reserve number. And you know, if you wanted it to live in there with words, we'd say 50,000 for climate action plan and 150 for capital reserve. It's really not any difference other than putting a label on it.
I kind of like the idea of putting it in there in words. And I don't know, Ann, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a good reminder and is more clear and specific.
Any objections, Mike?
No, it's something that's anticipated with the rate study, so it's not an issue at all financially.
Okay. And okay, so the next time we look at this, there'll be a line that says climate action plan, $50,000.
Well, you don't have to ever look at it again. So if you just want me to make that change and you can approve it, then it'll be there.
Oh, okay. So are you actually expecting these budgets to be approved today?
Well, I'm hoping they will be, but they don't have to be until, you know, your next meeting. People have been, you know, when they do their own budgets for 2021, they're always asking, what are your plans for utility rates? And we generally can't tell them in September or October, but we like to know, before December 15th, if we can.
Okay. I had one other question, and we had discussed electric vehicle incentivization of some sort, and that was going to maybe come clear a little bit more after the rate study. And I'm sorry I missed the last meeting. But is there, since it's not included, I assume that there wasn't something that came up that looked favorable to everybody, but was that discussed, and is that a possibility? And are there any options, Mike, that seem to make sense?
No, I don't think that it's a issue that's ripe right now. When we think about where it lives in the rate study, for me, it's definitely this idea of $50,000 a year towards climate action plan. You could use that to fund a rebate or something else. There's no recommendation in our rates to make any kind of structural changes that would make it harder or easier to do an EV rate yet. The one thing that I think we'll want to finish before we think about EV rates is this idea of our larger commercial customers. We're looking at doing demand billing for them as well. So when we're talking about EV charging stations, if it's just a simple level 2 in somebody's garage, it may or may not really change the characteristic of their load a lot. But if they're doing more significant charging, it certainly could. And I think we want to be able to talk about, like, when we're talking about EVs, we want to be able to deal with those fast chargers a little bit better with a demand charge before we get too far ahead. So when I say it's not ripe right now, I don't know that we've got a lot of demand locally for it. So I think we can probably do a simple rebate kind of idea, but I wouldn't expect to get a lot of business from it. And I actually think we probably don't want to yet get a lot of business from it, because we don't know what it looks like on our system, if you know what I mean, to have a lot of different chargers operating. So can we come back to that after we talk about our own EV charging project later on the agenda? Okay.
Is the demand charge that's being contemplated for commercial customers, would that be considered a rate increase? No,
it's a shift of costs allocations, which means there's likely to be winners and losers. Some people are going to end up paying more and some less. There's only 8 customers that we're currently looking at, so it's not like a significant chunk of our customer base that would be affected by it. And what we're doing right now is studying their load with our new meter system and trying to understand, okay, if we implemented a rate that looked like this, what would your rate look like? So we're going to spend the next X number of months, 6 months or something, generating that kind of data and saying, all right, if we were to implement a demand rate, we'll come to the PUC and with a suggestion, and then we'll spend the next 3 to 6 months doing kind of a side-by-side shadow billing of this is what our rates are now, this is what it would be with a demand bill, and so everybody kind of gets used to that idea.
Okay. Well, my last comment is my inclination would be to go ahead with a 1% increase in rates for electric rates. Again, to more fully fund the climate action plan, with the idea that, climate change is a pressing issue and we need to do more about it sooner. I guess I'd like you to respond to that. I imagine what you're going to say is that more money isn't necessarily going to get us anywhere because of the capability of our current staff. But would a 1% rate be functionally able to improve energy efficiency or renewable energy development in our community?
No. When you say 1%, what I would expect that to generate is about $25,000 to $30,000 a year. So would it? I suppose. I mean, if you're thinking like right now, there's 50 built into the budget and you want it to be 75,
Mhm.
then I'd recommend a 1% rate increase to do that.
Okay, Shane, could you use an extra $25,000? It's a yes or no question. Just kidding.
You know, the projects I'm working on right now are just kind of getting this whole thing off the ground. And I don't know what I would do with an additional $25,000, but let's just leave it at that.
Okay. Well, I guess I would make a motion to increase rates by 1% and make Shane come up with a way to further and more quickly implement the climate action plan.
I have to say I have mixed feelings about this one.
Okay. I mean, Mike would.
It's been such a tough year. I just am not sure about raising rates. I realize that 1% is quite small, and many folks it wouldn't be that big of a thing. But that's my only concern. I'm not concerned about. I'm sure we could find good ways to spend it, and I am totally on board with wanting to address climate change sooner rather than later. Just wondering if now is the best time, given this tough year that people have had. That's all.
Okay, well, given that we would need to decide maybe today, maybe next month, should we give it a month? Sounds like that wouldn't be the end of the world.
Well, you'd get a chance for Tim to weigh in too, and since there's not consensus here, you're going to need him to.
Okay, let's do that. Should we move on to sewer and water?
Exciting stuff, I know. The water budget. We gotta save sewer for last, I think, because it's the most fun. For water, you're going to notice a similar issue when it comes to sales, but when you look at its effect on our actual operating budget on the expense side, there is no effect. Like the amount of effort that it takes us to produce 10 to 15% less water is virtually the same as our current effort. So our budget goes down a little bit because the debt service is continuing to go down as our interest payments get a little bit smaller, and our need for the capital reserve is a little bit lower because, again, the amount that we're going to have putting towards either future capital projects or debt payments, I'm planning on having a little bit lower. If this was a non-COVID and the sales were not dropping at a 10% rate, or the sales were dropping at a 10% rate, but we didn't know why, then we might have to think about a more substantial rate increase in the water fund. But I think it's better in this case to just kind of slow down on our accumulating of cash towards future capital projects right now, and hope that when the COVID emergency starts to subside, that the water sales come back, and then this budget at its current rates is able to start putting more money towards those future capital projects. So having said that, let's look at the revenue side quick. It's really not down a whole heck of a lot in terms of money. Even if our sales are down kind of, between 5 and 10% for the year, the actual amount of money we're collecting is not down that much. I'm not exactly sure how to explain that very well, other than to say that we have a fixed fee when it comes to water. That's a more substantial amount of the revenue sales than, say, for the electric fund, where the fixed fee is a smaller percentage of the sales. So that's probably most of the explanation behind it, but I can't say for sure that's all of it. But I do know that I expect us to get, that $390 some thousand is probably what we're going to end up with this year. And I think it's fair to assume that next year is going to be pretty similar. All the same limitations that we faced this year are probably still going to be in place. There's not a lot of other money that comes into this budget. We do have this other one called SA and debt levy. That's a special assessment. There's a bond payment that lives in the water fund, but that the water rates are not funding. It's funded through a property tax levy and a special assessment. And so we just move that money from the general fund or the debt service fund into the water fund, but it's more of an accounting exercise. So it lives on both sides of this budget, but it's not really related to our rates right now. We had anticipated potentially removing that property tax levy to pay that bond with rates instead, is one of the ways that the utility funds could help with general fund support. But I don't think that is on the table right now, considering the reduced amount of sales we've got. So we have been making some small increases in the water fund for a while. Again, if we didn't have a COVID emergency, or some combination of that and the reduced sales, we'd probably look at another small increase. But I think, again, we can get away without having to do one in the water fund. And if sales stay down for the next couple of years, we'll have to look at rate increases again. Right now, this budget includes about $215,000 that goes towards making debt payments and accumulating to pay for capital projects. And of that, $175,000 is spoken for. So even though we're not looking at increasing rates, we're still taking $40,000 of this money and planning on having it set aside to pay for future capital projects. That's not enough to actually fund them with cash or to make the debt payments on them when they come around. The future capital projects for the water fund include the First Street reconstruction, which we haven't started planning it other than trying to figure out where it lives on the calendar. And, 2024 is kind of what we've got pegged in right now, that one of our debt payments goes away in 2024, and we can kind of slide this project in afterwards. But it could be 15 blocks of street, water, and sewer reconstruction that we end up doing with this project. And that is, many millions of dollars. It'll be a pretty big debt payment for water. 40 is not enough to pay their share. 40 plus the 50 that's going to go off the books is getting a lot closer. But we'll have to get this number built up either through increases in sales or increases in rates before we get to 2024. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that does.
Okay. So again, not increasing rates is my recommendation for water. Okay. Moving on to sewer. This one's trickier. I am recommending an increase in rates. Sewer has been fairly successful to accumulate cash for the past 5 years or so, and we spent it all. So where did it go? It's going to be put in the street in Highway 61 next year for the most part. So between that and the Public Works garage, that really ate up a lot of the reserves that we had in the sewer fund. We intended to use those reserves for those projects, but the Highway 61 came in a couple $100,000 more than we expected for the sewer related expenses. So now we need to build it back up, and we can't wait for water sales to increase to do that. Well, we need to do it now with the rate increase. So the expense side of things, again, it's pretty flat. Our level of effort to treat sewage is pretty consistent regardless of how much water is sold, and that's where our revenue comes from. I don't think there's really anything on there that I'd point out as a important. This is different than previous budgets. If we look at revenues, we're planning on them being down. It's not down, a significant amount, but it's 25,000 less than we expected it to be in 2020, and I expect it will be that same amount down again in 2021. So that 3% is based on if we make 560,000 in 2020, which we're hoping to do, then 3% of that will be another 16.8. You can see that at the bottom of our revenues. So our revenue budget for 2021 is down, $25,000 from the revenue budget in 2020. The reduced sales of water are affecting the sewer side more. Now the sewer rates are higher, so that's to be expected. Looking at the capital side of things, there's an operating loss built into this. You can see the revenues at 664, but the expenses are at 678. So I'm putting that operating loss here in the capital budget, where in the other two budgets, we had a capital reserve where we were increasing or using some of those expenses to build this number. We have to instead take some of those expenses away to reduce this number. So there's only 160,000 in cash to put towards debt payments. There's only two of them to a total of 125. So we're still putting some money aside for future projects. But without that 3% increase, it's less than $20,000 a year. And we've got the same issue with sewer that we do with water. That significant reconstruction project on First Street and Fifth Avenue as well. There's a lot of sewer lines. We're going to need more than $34,000 a year to fund those. So we really, I think, are going to need that 3% increase as a structural increase, whether the sales come back or not. And if they do, then we'll be in good shape. And if they don't, we'll have to look at further increases in the sewer side of things. We're not talking sewer plant in this budget, but I think it's important to remember that we're kind of in the middle of a lengthy conversation with the MPCA about mercury.
All right.
And we don't have an end date to that conversation. We currently don't have our permit renewed. It's been, 5 years since our 5-year permit expired, and that's not done. And I think that's okay. Like for us, that we certainly would rather it takes longer than shorter, as long as the conversation is a good one. And so far it's been. So what have we done as our side of the conversation? We've hired AE2S to do a study that looks at what improvements need to be made on our plant and what the cost associated with that would be to meet some of the mercury requirements. And some of the ideas are just crazy expensive. So a lot of our neighbor cities that also are affected by this mercury rate have gone ahead and made some of those improvements to their plants to the tunes of multi-millions of dollars. And we're trying to avoid that because it's just a horrible way for us to spend local tax dollars and utility rates for very little actual effect on the environment when we're talking about parts per trillion of mercury, when we're not the source of it. So hopefully that will resolve without us having to spend $10 million on a plant update. But if it doesn't, then this budget's not ready to deal with that. And we're going to need a lot of help from, hopefully from the state, but also from our ratepayers, unfortunately. There are other improvements that we think we would make to the plant that are not built into this right now. And I think that if we were in a better place financially, we probably would have a couple of capital improvements in the next 5 years that we would think about doing in the plant. But right now, I just don't see it. We don't necessarily have to. It would just be kind of as long as we're doing another big project, we'd do these things. So the plant itself is, some of it is 50 years old, and some of it, the majority of the mechanics of it were redone in about 1990, so 30 years old. It's time to start replacing some of the bigger pieces of it pretty soon. That's why I think we're going to need this rate increase now, because we will be developing a capital improvement plan, not in 2021, but in the next 5 years for plant improvements also.
Okay.
So I included a little chart just to kind of demonstrate what's going on with our water sales. There's a lot of data on there, and it's, you know, hard to just look at it and understand what's going on without really digging in. But I just wanted you to have an idea of some of the types of projections that I was using to imagine what's going to happen in 2021 with water sales. So we're looking at the last 10 years on a monthly basis of how many gallons we sold of water. And then there's an average for that month over the last 10 years. There's also a trend line that says if we did a linear regression of those 10 years, then what would it suggest is going to happen in 2020? And then we also did a 5-year trend line because water sales actually have statistically have gone down since 1980 on a pretty solid line. But these past 5 years, I think that line's flattened and kind of turned back up again. So you can see that the projection based on the 10-year trend is generally lower than the projection based on the 5-year trend, just because there actually is a bit of growth in the last 5 years. So then if you look at what we actually think we're going to, or what we actually sold in 2020, then there's two comparisons at the bottom of the chart. One is what's the difference between what we sold in each month of 2020 versus what the 5-year trend would have thought we were going to sell, and then versus what we actually sold in 2019. We're down, you know, if you look on a month-by-month basis, a couple of the months pretty significant, like June and August, for instance, the sales were down dramatically. So this, if you look at a curve of the sales, obviously there's a big peak in the summertime for water sales because we're just a lot more crowded. It's actually the opposite of our electric sales, which peak in the winter because people are heating with electricity. But some of the activities that would generate more water sales, like full hotels, the YMCA, things like that, just didn't pan out. So we think we'll probably continue October, November, December at that same 10 to 11% below where we were at, just kind of based on the difference between last year and this year and the difference between a 5-year trend and this year. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that's all I've got for you for budgets. As long as you're going to wait on the electric fund, you can also wait on water and sewer if you want.
I get the feeling we could approve the water and the sewer fund now. Would that be helpful?
Make your conversation shorter next month.
Sure, I move that we approve your the water and sewer budgets for next year.
And I would second. All in favor? Ann?
Aye. Aye.
And George? Aye. All righty. Thank you, Mike. That's it's good to know that stuff. And yeah, I mean, the 3% rise in sewer rates is, you know, that's a little bit, but you know, I'm very much in favor of investing in our sewer infrastructure. I think that's fundamental, and you know, best to really keep up on that and have that be a quality facility with quality people. So let's keep doing that. Should we move on to the next item, which would be a solar PV project?
So a million years ago in February, we talked about doing a 20 kilowatt solar PV project in 2020 and thought, no problem, this would be a simple thing to do. Pretty much since March, we haven't spent 2 minutes thinking about it. So that's the real update, that we haven't done anything. And but now I think we're getting around to the point where we're ready to start talking about it again. So Shane and I have kind of put together a quick plan for how we're going to put a project together. He's got already some contacts with local installers, although we imagine we're going to need to also get non-local installers involved to just look at a project. And so in the next month, we're going to have those conversations with a handful of installers and try to get a project designed and priced out and ready for you to look at. I don't know whether that means it's actually going to be installed in 2020, but based on weather, but we'll be ready to know what it means anyway.
Great.
Do you have a location in mind?
Well, I think that the Public Works facility is the most likely location, but we'll let the installer we end up working with assist us in going through that analysis just to make sure that it's a good site for the actual sunlight, but also that the equipment that's there supports its installation. So I think those are the two most important factors for me. Kind of a third factor that we've got is, would we use this as some kind of awareness tool as well? And at the Public Works Garage, of course, it's not going to be one because we don't really want people looking at that all the time. So we'll still look at the business park lot also that we've been talking about. The dog pound project is in a very similar state to the PV project, which is, it's gotten zero attention until these past maybe about 3 weeks, and now we're starting to try to get started thinking about it again, because the old dog pound's going to go away. So that'll move through the wintertime, I think, in a way that if we decide that's our location, we'll be ready to put something in there either in the next couple of months or first thing in the spring. So if you got other spots where you say, gosh, I wish it would be there, it's not too late to put those in the mix.
Well, I know we talked about, and I think we eventually discarded this idea of something on or near the library as something that would be more publicly, obvious, kind of an educational thing as well.
Yeah, and mostly discarded, I'd say. We can certainly look at the library with an installer and see if it's feasible or not. It's a lot more complicated to put it there. So I think we'll end up deciding that it's not worth it to do that, but it's not over yet. We'll at least take another look at it. And, the biggest complication is just confusion over electric bills and who owns it, and how the flow of money is handled. Because remember, even if it's the library, it's the city. The city has a contract with SIMPA that says every kilowatt that those panels produce, we have to sell to them and buy back from them, because we have to buy everything through them. Now that they've said they're willing to do that with the 20 kilowatt solar PV, but then you bring the library board into the mix as well, and they're paying a utility bill, and this thing's probably going to sit behind their meter on the building, and then what does it look like for their bills? And it just gets very complex.
Okay.
The second complex issue is structurally, the building was not intended to hold a significant PV on the roof.
Mhm.
And we don't really know if it's capable of it. It might be, but we'll need some expertise to look at it and talk about that. With the Public Works Garage, there's actually additional structure on that roof to make up for it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and I would just add that, kind of understandable that things got put on the back burner here this last few months. It's been,
Totally.
yeah, there's been a lot going on. I know from running a business that there was a lot of changes that had to happen, and they were difficult and took up a lot of time.
And boy, when whatever you thought you were going to do, you were wrong. And then whatever you thought the next 2 weeks was going to look like, that's probably not, only relevant for those 2 weeks before a new set of rules shows up, and you got to figure out how to do it all again. Yeah, everybody that's in any kind of small business this year, boy, did you have a challenge. And we've got a few of them that we're operating, so we know what it was like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and thanks to the city and the city staff for getting, being leaders in our community to get us through this time. I think it worked out pretty well, for a lot of different factors, but some of it was leadership and good work on the city's part. I did have another question about solar. I'm aware that the Arrowhead Electric has been looking into a large scale solar project, and to some extent they were maybe going to communicate with you and Shane, Mike, about that. Have you heard anything about that, or has there been some sharing of information, or no?
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
and I know about
that. The last I heard was when we tried to run away from a rainstorm in the community center parking lot, meeting the new C-Club staff person. So
Jesse Carlson.
that's been a while now, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So Anne, are you familiar with that at all?
I'm not.
Okay. I just know about it from C-Club, and C-Club was communicating with Arrowhead Electric as they went through this process. And what they did is they actually looked at they did a feasibility study of a large scale, I think maybe 5 megawatt solar system that had storage as a component of the entire project. And we're looking at the feasibility of that. And I think they're still looking into it. C-Club was asking Arrowhead if they would be willing to share some information with SIMPA and PUC about kind of how that shook out and how feasible it actually was numbers wise. So I guess just for now, that's just an FYI, and hopefully if anyone wants to, maybe they could contact Arrowhead Electric and ask for some information, or perhaps Arrowhead will contact us at some time. So I'll leave it at that. Should we go on to electric vehicles?
Hey, why not?
Okay.
We did talk to Arrowhead about this. If you recall, many years ago now, it's actually been years, we had a deal with Arrowhead Electric where we were going to partner with them to install a charging station here at City Hall's parking lot. And for a variety of reasons, we didn't do that. The biggest one being we were in the midst of trying to decide whether we were going to reconstruct City Hall and what the site would look like, and whether that installation would be permanent or whether it would have to move in 2 years because we just had to tear it down. So that maybe a year ago, though, that was a solved issue. Unfortunately, all the momentum in that project was gone. So Arrowhead is, whatever the deal was before, they either don't have the same funding available or they don't have the same interest available. They're basically saying they'll give us $10,000 if we put their name on it, which is still a very generous offer, but not enough to make the project interesting in and of itself to us. Of course, secondarily, we had this other EV charging station project happening because SIMPA as an organization was talking about doing a pilot project in each of the cities, and we've purchased some equipment. We actually own it and possess said charging station equipment right now. And we've been looking at where would that live. And it's the best location that we came up with was in Visico County's front yard. That they were interested in, and it's super visible. It's right on the highway. They're going to be doing some improvements to that space anyway, where they were looking at some parking stalls. It just was, a lot of it was coming together as a good fit. It's probably not going to happen though, because we need a lot of space to put the transformer and some of the other gear that supports the charging stations, and we don't have any space in the alleyway next to Visico County. So we talked to some of the private property owners around there about could we get some space, and so far we have not been successful in doing that. So what we're thinking is, all right, well, I'm going to keep looking. I'll keep talking to some folks over there, but I don't have real high hopes that that's going to happen. But in the meantime, we've got this equipment and we'd like to get it installed. So Shane's going to move forward with the let's get it installed in City Hall parking lot where we had already planned on putting some stuff. And so he'll be working with the rest of our staff on making that happen unless I show up before they build it and say, hold on, I've got us some room over here by whatever. So that's the plan. Again, I don't actually think that we'll be able to do that this year because, it's going to be weather dependent for the most part. And we may have already missed our window to do some of the work that needs to get done.
Sure.
But if not, we'll be ready to go first thing in the spring.
So I guess the reason I brought it up is because A, we talked about it before, but B, through my work at the radio station, I became aware of this project that the MPCA has going to actually fund charging stations all through greater Minnesota. And is this part of that?
It's not. No, they're actually SIMPA. Some of the SIMPA cities did get involved in that program, and they also got involved, if that's also the same one where the Volkswagen settlement money was involved.
Yes.
There was another series of funds. So they're trying to develop corridors of charging stations with that money. And we've looked at whether the North Shore could be a corridor, but it's not right now. So we're not using that money to do these projects. We could look at it.
They told us it is right now.
I mean, we don't have there's not a project where we're involved with
Right.
anybody that's got that funding on the corridor right now.
Right, but they
I don't know.
want,
I don't think that Arrowhead did either with their charging stations. I don't think they were using that funding either. So maybe there's still a window for Arrowhead and the PUC to look at that. But in the meantime, we're not looking for more money in charging stations until we get the one we've got installed somewhere, if you know what I mean.
yeah, they issued a map, and the North Shore is one of the corridors that they want to see done. So may I send you the information I have?
Sure.
Okay. That'd be great. I just feel like if they're offering up this Volkswagen settlement funds, maybe it would be a less expensive way for our community to access one or more of these.
And I looked into this a little bit, and I believe the applicants need to be interested in developing the entire corridor. And so that would include more than just our city.
Okay.
So I kind of ruled that out as an opportunity because we're not interested in developing the entire corridor, but we would be willing to work with someone who is interested in developing the corridor. So we're like one step ahead of where we could be effective on this.
I see. Okay. So, and by entire corridor, you're meaning Duluth to the border?
Yeah, whatever corridor we fit in under MPCA's categorization, that would be the corridor.
Okay.
Surely someone is in charge of developing the entire corridor and is looking for individual cities to be partners.
You think?
Unlikely.
It must.
They're the early phases of the proposals, so
Okay.
maybe we'll learn more next spring.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Thank
Shane, I mean, that funding it might be a window of opportunity. Could you maybe put that on your list to kind of check into that and really make sure there's not an opportunity that we're missing here? Because it would be, if there was an opportunity, we would want to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I did look into this, and it is for the proposals they're looking at right now are for the people, the projects of developing the entire corridor. And so I think if we give it a little more time, there may be someone who received that grant approaching us about putting charging stations in the city somewhere. And that would be where we'd want to jump on it.
Okay.
So in the meantime, as part of our site development for the chargers that we do own, we worked with Visigo County, but we've also talked to a few other local entities about, hey, would you be interested? And part of it, the idea for us is this is really a pilot program. Like, we're going to learn about how these things affect our distribution system. We're going to learn about how they're used and what the demand curve looks like and when they're busy and where the people are interested in them. But we're also going to learn, who are potential partners that might want to install charging stations on their property. And so that's kind of our focus right now when we've talked about EV charging, is with that sort of larger, more public commercial charging. And I think if we were thinking about financially partnering with anybody, that I would recommend we start with that rather than with the rebates or rates that individuals might use to put a charger in their garage, for instance. My suspicion is that we could give somebody $500 to put a charger in their garage, but that's not actually going to affect anyone's decision about whether they want to have an EV or not. Like if you've already decided the EV's for you, the $500 for the charger is not the barrier, if you know what I mean. But if you are a hotel and you're wondering, am I willing to give up 2 parking spaces? It'd be really nice for them to see some data on how our charging stations are being used and to kind of build some of that consensus or momentum around people driving here in electric vehicles and with a level of confidence. And so that when I think about EV charging rebates or rates, that's kind of where I'm looking at, is rather than a rate that anybody could access or a small rebate for a lot of residential customers right away, it would be more of maybe a slightly larger partnership from us for fewer commercial looking kind of public spaces in people's parking lots, if that makes sense.
And you mentioned that you'd already been talking to some private entities near City Hall, maybe, or downtown or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more I think that we want to talk to before we're done. I think it'll be easier for us to do that when we've actually finished installing our own charging stations, so that it's not a purely hypothetical conversation.
Right. I mean, I know it's awfully close to City Hall, but it sure seems like that both philosophically and space-wise and location-wise, the co-op would be a great spot.
I mean, other than the little occasional flooding issue, which maybe makes it not a great spot, I agree with you. But that might be a real big issue for them.
Yeah.
In terms of the commercial incentivizing, the lodging industry, for instance, to put in some charging stations, well, I'd sure like to see some sort of pilot incentive put forward. Not even so much that it would actually incentivize anything, but it would certainly raise awareness and get businesses thinking about putting in EV infrastructure, because we know it's coming down the road, and I think it's just good for everybody if that gets that pump gets primed a little bit. So maybe another benefit is just kind of the PR of it all and the public awareness part of it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes the idea of focusing on the commercials that much more enticing to me anyway, is you'll see it and we'll get to talk about it. But just like I don't believe that a small, a couple $100 is going to make the difference between somebody putting a charger in their garage and not, we don't really know what the barriers are for the potential commercial property partners with us. It may not be money. It may be something totally different. So we really want to have ours up and running and then be able to enter into those conversations with folks and try and learn what the barrier is. Why haven't you installed one? What are you waiting for? What do you need to know? Is it a financial issue, or is it a space issue, or is it something else? And I think once we've had those conversations, it'd be easier for us to put a proposal together.
Okay, then another thought I had was maybe for the stuff we have already, would the courthouse or the school or the YMCA community center, would any of those be appropriate locations?
I mean, they're possible locations. I think we want it to be downtown. It's, for sure we have a fast charger that I think is more designed for visitors than locals. So that putting it at the courthouse might work because that's not too far away, and most folks that are using EVs are pretty savvy at finding where the charging station is. There's a lot of ways for them to do that. But having it downtown and right in front of everybody is probably a better spot for it.
Okay.
When you said courthouse, I was just mentally picturing everything around the courthouse, and it dawns on me that the laundromat could be a great place because people are spending an hour there anyway doing their laundry.
We considered a lot of those places that you mentioned, George. I did not consider the laundromat, but right now, the EV market, the people who live in town or in the area, most of the EVs we see are not from residents of Cook County. They're from visitors. And so we thought, let's get these first chargers, these pilot chargers, right under their noses where they would be seen by everyone.
Yeah.
And where the visitors are. The visitors are downtown. So that's where we should put them.
At least for us, we're still peaking at the same sort of time that Simpa is peaking in the early morning and kind of early evening times. And the middle of the night is not a peak for us. In Arrowhead territory, it is. In the wintertime in particular, a peak for them because that's when they're cycling all their heat on. But I think if we were going to add load, we would still want to do it in the middle of the night. And so if it's commuters that are charging their vehicles, I think we'd rather find a way to get them to do that at home rather than at their place of work. And so for visitors, we want to be downtown, and for commuters, we probably want it to be in their garage.
Okay.
Cool. Well, keep at it. I think that's a worthwhile endeavor, and it's good for the PUC's our revenues too. So, thank you.
Do you want to still talk about C-CLIP?
I do. Anne, would you be willing to be the C-CLIP representative from the PUC? I think it would. Obviously,
tell me what that entails, if you would.
Well, C-CLIP, as you know, as a former board member, is a nonprofit. I think they have a monthly board meeting. I imagine you would kind of be invited on a come when you'd like basis, and just to so you'd just be the liaison or the representative from PUC that would be the contact person for C-CLIP.
Absolutely.
Okay. Do we need to make that official in any way, Mike, or that can just happen?
Yeah, if she goes, that makes it official.
Okay.
You're in, Anne.
All right. Woohoo.
Yeah. And Chris O'Brien is president now. And, you know, they've got their fingers into a bunch of fun stuff. You know, home and business PV systems and energy efficiency and all the usual good stuff.
Okay.
Oh, and they do, and they also hired a new coordinator, Jesse Carlson, just a few months ago.
Oh.
And so she is just, you know, kind of, I think, gotten the reins appropriately mastered and is about to do great things. So,
is she taking the position that Matthew had?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Anything else?
So I mentioned to George right before the meeting started, this is the next month will be George's last month on the PUC. That'll be his second full term, and we require folks to at least take a year off before they can serve again. And Tim's not going to serve again either because his term is concurrent with his council seat, and he's not run, so he will not be here in January. It will be just you, Ann. We need to find some folks to sit in those chairs with you. Now, one of them will come from the city council. We don't know who that is. They'll select that person in January.
Okay.
But we'll need to recruit another member to be on the PUC. Now, the city just does kind of a general recruitment process for all of our boards. And we've tried a lot of different ways. We put it in the newspaper. We put it on social media. We try to spread the word. And what I found over the years is the best, most effective way is to personally ask somebody to do it.
Yeah.
But staff isn't going to do that because it's not our place to go and ask people to serve on boards. Instead, we ask people to ask people. So here I am asking you all, find somebody that you think would be good on the PUC and see if they're willing to serve because we're going to need at least one person.
Yeah.
And if they don't like the PUC,
heads up on this, so
yeah,
I've been thinking about it.
Don't take no for an answer if they don't like utilities, because we are also going to need a lot of planning commissioners, park board members, and EDA members, and library board members. So
Sure.
we're gonna need lots of help.
In all honesty, I've already asked one person and she's thinking about it.
Terrific. Thanks.
And I've got other names written down as possibles, and I will be in touch.
Sweet. Thank you.
That's very helpful. And for our large audience at home, you know, if somebody's actually out there watching this meeting right now, we know you're interested, so sign up.
It's a great gig.
It's super interesting.
Interesting, and again, it's a quality organization. I got to say, it's really a pleasure to be in this role in an organization that works this well and provides such a valuable service.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anything else for the good of the order,
Nope.
as Carl used to say?